In this lesson, we'll be bringing on the start button. Okay, so our start button is right here, and I want it to appear just a little bit after my frame pops up around my phone. So we know that the frame is popping up around the phone just kind of right in here through this time. And I'm just going to use that page up and page down keys to kind of figure out exactly where some of these things are happening. So I'm going to just kind of go backwards here while I can still see my actor's hand. And it's a pretty safe guess that just right about here where that phone finishes is the earliest possible point that our start button could appear. But I don't want it to appear too much later after that, because it's obvious that the actor recognizes that there's a button there, and that's what he's moving towards to push. So it would make sense for the button to pop up halfway through him moving his hand over here, because it's obvious he knows where he's going. So let's kind of go backwards here, just right to the ending keyframe of that phone animation, and we'll actually just go ahead and set another marker here just to kind of indicate, okay, the phone animation is done and here's the start button. So this is where I want to start that buttons animation, and I'm going to do it really simply just using some scale keyframes. But one of the other things that I'm noticing is that when we get to the part where he actually pushes this button, we are not really in the right place. So just kind of right there on that marker, you see that his fingers are a little bit to his left of the button. So what we need to do is kind of just shift everything over, and there's an easy way for us to do that while still seeing how it's interacting with our person. So we don't want to just take the whole interface and shift it over, because then we wouldn't really be lined up with the phone anymore. So I'm going to just kind of try to move everything based on leaving that phone frame where it is, and we'll just make everything else work around that. So let's go ahead and go inside of that interface. So just double click that, and we know that this is what needs to scoot over here, and it pretty much needs to go kind of right in between where the clock and the start button is. But what I'm going to do, just to be even more accurate than that, is take a look at what it is appearing like on the outside. And another thing that I want to take into consideration is that if I move this over much closer to the clocks, there's going to be a lot less space between that start button and the clocks and all of these other buttons. So I'm going to just go ahead and shift all of these at once. And since we cropped all of those layers, it's really easy just to go ahead and select all of those just by dragging. So go ahead and do that. And then we'll come back over there to our main integrated comp, and what I want you to do is lock that comp view panel. So just come up here where you see toggle viewer lock, go ahead and lock that. Then we'll double click on the interface, and it's going to open that up as another window for us. So instead of moving this, going back and forth, trying to do that, now we can go over here and click where that is locked, but we still have the same layers on the timeline from that composition interface comp. So what I'm going to do now is, just with those same layers selected, I'm just going to use my left arrow key, because I know that's the direction that I'm moving in. And just one second, let's make sure that we have the right things selected. You just want to make sure that you click on the ones that you have selected here. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit that left arrow key, and I'm holding shift just to kind of make it go faster, and we'll move those buttons. So I'm just moving it right to where his fingers are kind of just right to the middle of that start button. So now let's kind of just go back inside of that comp interface and see how that looks. So the only problem I'm really having here is that that button looks a little bit too big, and it's kind of in my way a little bit as far as just interacting kind of strangely with the corner of the phone. So we may need to scale that down just a little bit, but let's go ahead and take a look at how it's going to interact later on once he grabs that maps button. So it's really easy now that we set all of those markers. We just can come over here. This is kind of the pictures. This is more to do with those same pictures. We'll just kind of go forward a little bit more. And and this is going to be where he first starts to interact with that maps button. So if I just kind of come forward a little bit right there, we notice that his fingers are actually going to be right here. So we need that maps button to be scooted over a little bit. So let's go ahead and just kind of readjust those in the same way that we did earlier. So we want to come out here to our locked comp and then make sure that this other composition that we're working with, go ahead and go inside there, has selected what we want to work with. So I'll go ahead and select all of those buttons, and then we'll choose that main composition that we have locked, and then we'll just work with those buttons down here, and I'm going to arrow those back over to the right until we can get that centered. And we probably need to move them down a little bit too, just kind of like that. Now I don't want to move them down too far because I still want them to look like they're pretty close in line with that start button. So maybe he just didn't quite hit that one high enough up on the button. It's still going to register that he's working with that. So we'll come back up here to our main integrated comp just like this, and that still looks pretty good across that line there. I'm happy with the way that that looks. And if we go inside of the interface, yes, these look maybe a little bit lower. You could maybe lower the clocks too, and that might look kind of interesting. He's not actually going to interact with those, so if you wanted to maybe arrow those down a few just to kind of balance that back out, you could definitely do that as well. And this might be something that you would like to scoot over, since we scooted all of those other pieces over. Maybe have that kind of realign with those clocks just like that. And really that looks a lot better just kind of now that we've gotten that in place. So now what I want to do is go ahead and just animate in that start button. So now that we have it where it needs to be, we'll just come back out to the main integrated comp, and right there where we set that marker where he's going to be pushing the button, it already needs to be in place. Other marker that's marking where the phone finishes its animation, and that's where we want the start button to begin. So I'll go ahead just with my current time indicator on that marker. We'll go inside of our interface, and let's just bring our start button to begin at that point. So just select your start button, hit the left bracket key, and that's just going to pull that forward. And if you want, you can bring that start button up just so that it's right underneath the phone, and we'll kind of continue that cascade look that we were going for. And if you want to change the color of that, maybe change it to just another color in there just to kind of help start having you recognize, okay, my start button is pink, and then you just look for that color once you start animating a lot more. And I really just want to do a very simple animation with this, just kind of a scale animation. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this back up to at least half, just maybe so we can see the details here a little bit better. It'll just give it a second to load. And that looks a little bit better. So now what I want to do is just open up the scale property for my start button. So just hit the S key, and I want to have this scale up and have a little bit of a recoil. So we know that this looks pretty good at 100%. So I'm just going to take this down to 0 for now. We'll just hit 0 and enter. And then let's just scale this up over about 10 frames. So I'll hold shift and hit page down to go forward those 10 frames. And then we'll have this go up a little bit past 100. So let's just do something like 102. And then let's go forward about 3 more frames to add that recoil and take it back down to 100. So basically it's getting a little bit bigger than that final size and then kind of shifting back down. If you want to know more about kind of those principles of animation, you can check out our 12 principles of animation in After Effects course and just learn a lot more about little principles like that, just making things look a little more polished. And 3 frames might not be enough, so you could drag that out just a little bit more if you want that to last longer there at the end. And I'm just kind of doing a quick little RAM preview of what that looks like. And maybe even that size right there, 102, isn't enough. You might need to take it up to 105, make it just a little bit bigger than that, and just kind of do another RAM preview until you're happy with the way that those look. And another thing you could do just to kind of add a little polish is to add some interpolation to those keys. So you could select all your keys and then go up to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, and choose Easy Ease. So that's going to give you just a little bit more of a smooth motion for that animation. We'll go ahead and watch that. That looks really nice. And you could also add some motion blur in there too if you wanted. And then later we can check on our motion blur switch for all of our layers. But I'm going to leave it off now just so that I'm able to still run pretty quickly with this and not be too worried about it. And one of the other things that I'm noticing just kind of as we're working here really close with some of these dials is that we don't have our continuously rasterize or collapse transformation switch turned on. So you may want to do that. It might not make a huge difference, but some of these layers could probably be a little more crisp. So just kind of zooming in on this one, if I turn on the collapse transformation switch, you see that that gets just a little bit crisper on those edges. So you could go in and do that for the rest of your layers. Now you want to be careful if you start turning some of these into 3D layers or turning on collapse transformations on that top layer here in the main integrated comp. So if we need to turn that on later, we can, but it can end up causing problems. So we'll just be kind of careful of how we use that. But you can see that that does look a little bit more crisp here on the outside. And also, one of those things that might be helpful is just when we're using that, you see now that's not being cut off anymore because it's looking inside of that entire comp. So maybe for this number counter we don't want to have that switch on and we can just clip that where it is, or maybe once we start working with that we'll change it up a little bit and then we'll be able to turn that back on. But for now it's a little distracting, so I'm just going to leave it off. So in this lesson, we just kind of got a feel for how things were looking with some of the animations of the pieces here as far as where they were interacting with our actor's hand out here on our main level. We moved a few things around just to make that fit a little bit better. And then we also added a really small animation just to bring on that start button. And just really quickly, if I scrub through this, you'll be able to see that pops up just in time for our actor to kind of come to that point and hit the button. And then we'll be able to introduce some of the next pieces in the rest of our shot.